One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Welcome to our latest STRAT Talk I-5 community. Today, we have Colonel Sauter with us. He was the first full-time Space Force professor at the United States Air Force Academy. My name is Cadet Smith, and with me is Cadet Cogdale from the National Outreach Team. And thank you so much for your time, Colonel Sauter. Welcome.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you, Cadet Cogdale, Cadet Smith. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to the I-5 community.
Of course. Now, Cadet Cogdale, would you like to ask the first question?
Yes. So, what motivated you to join the Space Force? And could you give us some insight into what you currently do and what some of your responsibilities and your role within the Air Force entails?
Sure, absolutely. So what motivated me to get into the Space Force was I have been a acquisitions officer in the space community for roughly 20 years prior to joining the Space Force. And in my position as the permanent professor and head of the Astro Department at the Academy, we teach astroengineering, we teach space operations, and I felt that it was important to show that senior leaders at the Air Force Academy are also senior Space Force guardians. And making that transition was not easy, but was definitely necessary to kind of show the future leaders what the Space Force could offer and give cadets the opportunity to talk to senior Space Force officers. So my current duties, it's actually interesting. You caught me at a unique time. Like Cadet Smith said, I am the first permanent professor in the Space Force, which is great. And the Air Force Academy has permanent professors as well as the U.S. Military Academy. And what we are is the long-term continuity for our disciplines. And in this role, I've been the head of the Air Force Academy's Astronautical Engineering Department for almost 6 years now. And in that role, I am responsible for all the curriculum and the education that goes down with regards to basically most of the space education in the astro engineering or space operations field. Every 5 years, I'm required in this job to go out and do a rebluing tour, meaning that I have to go out to an operational unit somewhere and go figure out what it's like to be in the Space Force again. And so you caught me right in that time. So I'm actually sitting with the U.S. Space Command right now in the J8, and I work for the commander of U.S. Space Command and the deputy commander of U.S. Space Command directly in their technology assessment team. And we are responsible for, on the day-to-day, coming up with the good analytics to support key leadership decision-making. So they come up with good ideas, and we go help back the ideas or tell them where the ideas could be modified to make it more effective for future Space Command operations. And that's what I do in the day-to-day. After this year of rebluing, I will head back to the Air Force Academy, where I will continue to be a permanent professor there at the Academy. And professor life at the Academy is pretty good. It's one of the best jobs in the entire Air Force and Space Force. If you ever get a chance to teach it in the Academy, I would definitely recommend it. We're responsible for not only teaching, but we get to do some absolutely fun stuff like building Falcon Sats. And I look forward to talking to you guys all about that.
Of course. Thank you so much, sir. Now, is your position a little bit out of the ordinary for a traditional Space Force job? And if so, could you talk about maybe how your role differs from big Air Force or big Space Force in general?
Absolutely, yeah. So my job is a little bit different. My role is unique in that currently there's only one Space Force permanent professor, and there's only roughly 22 other Air Force permanent professors in the Air Force, in the Department of the Air Force. The permanent professor role is very unique, and it's got its own governance instruction. But essentially, when I was selected for this position, I was taken out of the regular line of the Air Force and now the regular line of the Space Force. And I am appointed, by the president, approved by the Senate for this specific position. I cannot promote any longer. So I will be Colonel Sauter indefinitely until such time as I retire. And then if I stay long enough, I can be retired as a brigadier general. But in this role as Colonel Sauter, head of the Astro Department, I can stay essentially indefinitely. I can stay until I'm 64 years old. So long time. Still got quite a few years ahead of me here. But again, that's the long-term continuity. So we're great officers that go and do lots of great stuff for the Air Force and the Space Force. So I often go to development teams and help guide and mentor young officers and career officers in their roles and their future opportunities. I get to the pleasure of working with a whole slew of cadets and seeing them off and starting a whole new series of guardians on their journey. It is a very unique position in that, again, there's only about 23 slots, and that's it. And so once somebody retires or leaves, then a slot opens up, and there's a very competitive selection process, and it's more about the timing. And when these slots open up, you have to have the right degree. You have to have usually a PhD. You definitely have to have a PhD in the particular subject, and usually your career has to align with that subject in some way, show that you've got the leadership in that field. Then, like I said, it's appointed by the president and then approved by the Senate. It's a unique process, and for me, I was already a permanent professor of astronautics in the Air Force. And so while the rest of the Air Force and other services got to transition early, it took me a little bit longer to work through the rigmarole to get this new position created. But now that we've kind of broken the seal on it, I'm hoping that we'll see future Space Force permanent professors in the near future. Yeah.
Of course, that's super interesting. And your, I guess, generation or era of officers, we could call it, is very unique in the fact that you've served in the Air Force and now are in the Space Force and have seen both sides of the operations and how it works. So I was wondering if you could speak to the difference in culture, if you've perceived any between the two military branches.
Sure. So yeah, like I said, about 20 years in the Air Force, and all of that time has been in the acquisitions or academic field. And so now moving into the Space Force, I see a little bit of difference. I knew a lot of the space operations community prior, so in my Air Force time, and seeing them now, I don't see that big of a shift yet in the culture and the change. It's slow and growing. We're only almost 4 years old now, and so there's probably a lot more to grow and develop as a culture. I will say it's been super exciting to be on the forefront of developing what this culture is, and I'm really envious of you and your generation because you'll get to step into the Space Force and help really define it. The Space Force culture of my generation is really defined by a former space and missile community where we were combined with two different career fields and had a very much focus on serving the nation in that strategic role for missile operations, and then also for space operations. And I was also in a generation where we were right in between the Cold War and where we see strategic competition going right now. And so space was a very benign environment. And the generation your generation, what you're getting to walk into, you have so much opportunity because you're kind of in that stage. And I like to tell the cadets this too. We're in that stage where between World War I and World War II, we had aircraft that were flying, that were biplanes and single engine things. We had airplanes, we had balloons, and that was essentially it. And air resources at the time constituted mostly reconnaissance, communication, a little bit of navigation assistance, but that was it, right? And that's what we saw air for. And between World War I and where we were with World War II, we saw just an explosion of technology, an explosion of ideas, an explosion of, the really hard-thinking warfighting mentality. Because in World War I, we figured out, hey, air could be a fighting domain. World War II, we made it a warfighting domain, and we utilized it. And now we went from a very peaceful domain where space has been used for communication, navigation, and reconnaissance. And we're seeing that move now towards, hey, gearing up for a strategic competition where space is the ultimate high ground, and we're going to need to be ready for the battle in that domain. So while space is very, very small now, I can see by the time you reach the end of your career, we could be a very, very large service with a very broad scope of responsibility. So I'm excited.
Yes, thank you. Go ahead, Cadet Cogdell. Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're good. So you kind of already spoke to how you kind of ended up in the Space Force and at the Academy. So my other question that I wanted to ask actually is more of like, how would you sell the Space Force to a cadet in ROTC or at USAFA who might be on the fence about whether or not they want to track Air Force or track Space Force? Like, what do you think is the biggest selling point of the Space Force that you think would get a cadet interested?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. So space is super exciting. And I love bringing the energy into the classroom, and most of my faculty are very, very excited about space. We're all passionate about space in some way, and that excitement really helps get other people excited as well. So that helps sell itself. We found that a good way to get people excited about space is typically media. And so when we have awesome movies or shows or you name it about space, that really excites people. But how do I get cadets excited about a domain in which you don't get to see, you don't get to operate in unless you're, very lucky and become an astronaut, but we know it's vitally important, right? It makes everything we do, from the communications infrastructure, the financial infrastructure of America, everything is going through space. Every single warfighting element is integrated in some way through space. And so how do I get people excited about that? And that is essentially my job. I usually like to talk to cadets about kind of what the threats are there, about the importance of space, where we've come. I usually lead in with discussions about what does warfighting look like across the centuries. We went from early times where the warfighting domain was as far as you could stretch your sword, to land battles, to armies, to moving those armies onto ships and becoming navies. And two-dimensional warfare lasted for a long time, and then we had the advent of kind of World War I and the airplane, and we kind of moved into that next domain. And we were really excited, and we've been doing great stuff in the air domain, and had an Air Force for a while. In the late 50s and early 60s, we got to venture out into space, and we got to see what that final frontier finally looks like. But again, we really didn't do much in terms of making the space a warfighting domain. But now we're to that point where I think the next great power competition, we're going to see a lot more in the way of warfighting efforts in that domain. And again, that's your generation. So I love to get cadets excited about kind of the history and see the natural progression of where we have fought in the past, where we're going, the natural evolution. Because if you think about Earth, and we shrink Earth, the size of the Earth, down to about the size of a peach, that fuzz of the peach, just that fuzz is about the size of the atmosphere. And so for millennia, humans have been fighting wars, engaging in battle in just the skin and the fuzz of that peach. And now with space domain, we go much, much further. And so there's really no limit to our sky and what we can do. But I mean, talk is one thing, seeing and doing is another thing. So what I love to do at the Air Force Academy is I love to get the cadets involved in a number of different space activities. So if you didn't know this, at the Air Force Academy, we have our FalconSat program. So we actually have 2 satellites in orbit. We're about to launch another satellite into orbit. And the cadets in some engineering fields and other disciplines get to actually build those satellites. And we're not talking the little tiny CubeSats. These are large ESPA size or dishwasher size spacecraft that are performing missions for the Air Force research labs and doing some great technology demonstration. But the really cool thing is that any cadets from anywhere, including ROTC, and we're actually bringing in some West Point and Annapolis cadets and midshipmen and to fly the satellites. And so we have cadets, and I take 18-year-olds, 17, 18-year-olds who were just graduated out of high school, and in 6 months I'm getting them to fly $30 million plus satellites. And it's the only place in the entire Space Force where you can go and fly a spacecraft and learn the basics of flying a spacecraft and how to retrieve data, how to handle anomalies, how to take charge and command. And it's the only place you can do that. And then we get those cadets certified, and those cadets then get to train other cadets in space operations. And then they're going to go off, they're going to graduate, they're going to go to undergraduate space training, they're going to go to their units, they're going to actually start to fly systems, and they're going to get that specialized training in what their actual system needs, but they're going to have a very solid core of background and understanding on space operations. And any cadet can do that, any major. We're not beholden to whether you're a STEM major or otherwise, but we get a lot of very, very excited cadets in that community. And that's one way. But again, sometimes space operations and sitting behind consoles is not that exciting for some cadets. So how do I get even more cadets excited about space and the future opportunities of space? Well, this 2 years ago now, and this last summer was the first full running of it. The Air Force Academy instituted a program that was really pushed down from the Chief of Space Operations directly. General Raymond came to us and said, "Hey, Colonel Sauter, I really want you to develop a summer program that gets cadets excited about space, the way that our jump and our storing program get cadets excited about the air domain." And so we said, "Yes, sir, we'll go do that." And I'll be frank, we were blatantly looking around saying, how do we get people excited about space? What would make people really excited about space? And we came naturally to astronaut training and said, oh, maybe there's something there. So we went down to Houston. We talked to the Astronaut Training Corps. We got a list of essentially all the activities that they typically go through to become astronauts over, many, many years. We kind of crossed off those things that were not feasible or that were already being accomplished in the cadet experience, and came up with what we call the Azimuth Program. And so Azimuth Program, and it's open to ROTC, to cadets, to other service academies, is an opportunity for cadets to come for 3 weeks. You learn about the Space Force. We do a lot of Space Force indoctrination, but we also let you understand what the domain is. So we'll get you down into the pool, and we'll do some underwater neutral buoyancy types of scuba activities. So you kind of understand what it's like to build and to manufacture in a semi-weightless environment where you don't have the same resistance that you have in land on the Earth. And then we take you up into the Vomit Comet, and we do some parabolic flights. So you get some actual free fall time and see what that's like. And then you get the opportunity to dive down and do some space operations with our folks down in the FalconSat area. And some of the folks can actually get completely certified to fly the FalconSat by the end. And so that's the another good way, but that wasn't enough. And so we keep looking for ways to get people excited about the domain and involved. And so we've actually really dived into virtual reality as well, because the best way to get into the domain is, if you can't be there physically, is to do it virtually. And so we've got virtual headsets that a lot of the cadets in Azimuth get to put on and see. And so you fly around in a virtual world. You get to see what space is like, what what the preponderance of space assets we have and how crowded space can be from that perspective. We have worked with a number of different organizations within the Colorado Springs area to develop games. And so we have games like the Borg simulation and Black Horizons that allow cadets to do virtual reality or 3D modeling of orbital trajectories and really games. Like they're competing against like a near peer adversary in relative motion. And so you may have objectives to avoid a certain satellite or go observe a certain satellite. And so so we've got all these different things set up so that throughout your cadet experience, you should be able to see and get excited about space in some way. And I'm always looking for ideas. And so, as folks run across different ways to get people excited about space, I'd love to bring it in and incorporate that and hopefully make that next generation of space operators, truly understand the domain that they're getting into and, be the best warfighters that they can be.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So I might have missed it in your explanation, but if we have any cadets that are super interested in either joining the FalconSat program or Azimuth, what would be the steps to take to get involved?
Absolutely. So if they're interested in the FalconSat program or in the Azimuth program or any other opportunities that the Air Force Academy provides, best way to do it is probably reach out through your I-5 community. You've got a good I-5 grouping at the Air Force Academy. They can help pull those connections. We have a small unit at the Academy. It's only 3 members now, but it is a dedicated Space Force. It's a Delta 13 Det 1, and they are at the Academy. And Colonel Mark Sands, who's been on your program before, he runs it right now. And he'd be the great person to talk to. And he can help connect you and connect you to those programs and those opportunities, especially for Azimuth. For FalconSat, feel free to reach out to me at any time. Like I said, I'm a long-term permanent professor, so I'll be there a while. So if you've got my contact, I'll still be there for a while.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think many of our cadets will be looking forward to that in future summers.
Absolutely.
Speaking of looking towards the future, if we go back to just broad Space Force considerations, are there any specific fields that you think cadets should focus on in undergraduate studies to be better prepared to be Space Force officers in the future?
Sure, certainly. So what I've seen is that the Space Force has requested that everyone be STEM cognizant. What does STEM cognizant mean? It can mean a whole bunch of things. But ideally, any sort of STEM career field is going to really help you out, especially when you get to a very technical field like what we do in the Space Force. Whether you're flying satellites, you're designing missions, whether you're dealing with launch vehicles, you're dealing with the radars or the space domain awareness stuff, you've got to have kind of a technical acumen to really be good. Now, do we need those big thinkers in political science and philosophy and English? Absolutely. We want a diversity of thought. So really any major that comes with that diversity of thought would be probably good for us. But what will really help, and this is just, Colonel Sauter coming from an acquisitions field, is if you take classes or a class in undergraduate space. So whether that's aerospace engineering, whether that's a understanding space or a basic space class, if you can take a class that lets you understand the domain, lets you understand what orbits are like, understand what how launch vehicles work, just the basics, that's going to get you so much further than your compatriots that are also joining, and will give you that edge. Now you're going to get that training, especially when you get to the Space Force. Undergraduate space training has been really good about going through soup to nuts from the very basics all the way to understanding how operations work. And you're going to get that, but to really succeed and to I think to be good and to hopefully accelerate your career, some sort of space in your education will certainly help.
Yep, and that's exactly what I-5 is hoping to provide for cadets that might not have that opportunity at their university. But
awesome, wonderful.
Great. Cadet Cogdell, I think you have another question.
Yeah, so just like as a catch-all question, as we're wrapping up here, what would be your biggest leadership advice if you can look back on your career, see things that either you might have done differently or things that you would continue to do the same? Like, what would be your biggest piece of advice for us as cadets, regardless of whether or not we're going Air Force or Space Force? Just some words for us as we're preparing to become the leaders of tomorrow's future.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think the biggest part of leadership is, there are so many aspects of leadership, but really the biggest part of leadership is being passionate about your people and your mission. And really, especially when you start off as a second lieutenant, you jump into a brand new career field, jump fully in, right? Embrace the career field, embrace what you're doing. You may not fully understand all the different aspects of what you're being asked to do, but it will make sense in time. And then as you jump in and as you embrace what you're doing, the term of bloom where you're planted is very, very applicable. So there hasn't been a Space Force or Air Force job that I have where I haven't loved it. I mean, I have absolutely loved every aspect of my journey. And a little bit about my journey, I went from the Air Force Academy, where I got to build small satellites with the FalconSat program, to grad school, then to the Air Force Research Labs down at Kirtland, where with the Space Vehicles Directorate, I got to work directly on building the next generation or the first generation of small satellites doing RPO. And so I got to build the Angels program. From there, I got to teach space at the Academy again. I got to go get my PhD in a foreign country. I got to go to England and learn space with some of the leading experts on building small satellites at Surrey Satellite Technologies. Then I got to go over to the NRO and see how we build big national systems that do important missions for the country and for all of our allies. And then I got to, briefly go work with the legislative liaison crew, see how the political side really marries with the military side, and how together we get, important stuff done for the nation. And then I got to come back to the Academy, where I was selected for this position, and I get to teach future generations. And throughout all of those different opportunities, it's a vast different experience from job to job. I just dived right in. I jumped in, took every opportunity to learn about the job as much as I could, to get involved, and then to take care of my people. And where you can, take care of your people, take care of your airmen, take care of your specialists, take care of anybody else and any other service you're dealing with, because that's what the Space Force does, is we provide service to everyone else. And so we got to make sure we understand that in our field, we need to be service oriented. We're getting what people need so that they can conduct the war in whatever domain that they're doing all the time. And so leadership wise, I'd say, again, you probably hear this ubiquitously, the people first, the job always, and that's always the case. The people first, they're the ones that make the mission. So on the day-to-day, if you have somebody that comes in that has an issue, stop what you're doing, take care of them, take care of your people. The Space Force right now, we're lucky enough that we don't have bullets flying, and typically no one's going to die on the job. So we got to make sure that we're building our team, we're building our community, so that in the future they're ready to fight the fight when it comes. And we can't do that if we sour on the inside. So that's kind of my leadership advice for the near term. Hope that helps.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is fantastic. And I think our cadets definitely will learn, hopefully from your advice and take that into consideration as they move forward. Before we wrap up, did you have any last words of advice or last things that you wanted to share towards the end of our talk?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I just wanted to thank the I-5 community. I think it's a great opportunity to learn a little bit about space by getting involved with space. I mean, my Air Force Academy department, our logo is learning space by doing space. And I fundamentally believe that at all scales, right? So if you're not involved in it, then you can't be effective, right? So you got to get involved. You got to get excited about it. Space is one of those domains where it's fast, it's exciting, it's new, it's the new technology, and we need exciting new folks like yourself. We need that new generation to bring new blood in, to bring new ideas. This is an opportunity for you, and I'm extremely envious of everything that I see in the works, and you know the opportunities that are available to you and to you over your career. So I wish you all the best, and I look forward to serving with you in the future.
Thank you so much, sir. I really appreciate the words of advice that you've shared today and taking some time out of your day to speak to our community.
Certainly.
All right. And with that, I think we can wrap up our talk for the day. But again, thank you. And I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.
Same to you.